Our beer of the week this week is Cold Snap. It's a white ale by Sam Adams. I know we're all dreaming of a white Christmas. Christmas is almost here. And speaking of a cold snap, it was very, very cold this morning. It kind of messed with my car a little bit, but we're good now. We're good here, and we're ready to get this pod done.
Yeah, brisk start. The winter season is about the start here in North Carolina. We'll probably get that one snow in February coming up in a couple months. But talking about what we want for Christmas, man, I just want a victory at this point for Panther Nation, for this franchise, for Bryce as a rookie to just get something to build on for next year. And it doesn't happen week in and week out. It's the same narrative. We hang in it for about three quarters, and then by the fourth quarter, our defense is gassed, our offense has no answers, and then we get blown out. It went from a 14-6 one possession game to 28-6 really quickly, and it's just those kind of routes. It leaves something to be desired, and I tune out. I have tuned out the last couple weeks because it's so bad.
Yeah, I feel like you're saying, it's the same thing every week, and it's even the same thing when we talk about the game review. It's like Bryce missed probably two or three guys on this one. He had a pretty bad miss to Mingo, and what I would say was Mingo's first real he got 2 or 3 yards of separation on a deep route this year, and Bryce just overthrew him.
He
I
had
don't
the
know if
one in
he's
Tampa
expecting a
Bay.
hit.
He had the one in
Oh
Tampa Bay
yeah,
down the sideline. But yeah, no, for the
yeah, yeah,
most
yeah.
part, yeah, he has not been nearly as wide
They
open as he was. Yeah.
Yeah, they just aren't connecting, and that's really disheartening because they were both top 40 rookies. You'd hope that they would build a rapport, but they haven't yet. And then more drops from receivers. I know Stephon Sullivan had the drop over the middle on his little slant route there. Would have been a first. Thielen had a drop. Raheem Blackshear just fell over on a 4th and 1, and Bryce still put it on his rib cage, with him falling, and
Yeah.
he just wasn't in the right spot to catch it there. And then the main guy, DJ Chark, man, I know he had words after the Titans game saying that Bryce's check to a screenplay was wrong. I don't know if you can talk about anything anymore, Chark, with the way you're playing. Like, all these drops are horrible. He had another face mask play, not a face mask penalty, mind you, where Bryce put it on his face mask and Chark just couldn't put his hands up because I don't know what he was doing. And then the 4th down, it wasn't quite in the end zone like another famous number 17, but in the Saints dome, by the way. But it was a 4th down play, probably 20 to 25 yards. Bryce puts it on the money. It wasn't even broken up or anything. He just let it fall through his arms.
Yeah. It
And
was it was
there's
a decent back
yeah,
shoulder kind of look
yeah,
down the sideline.
and it just reminded me of the Funches play because it was around that same spot. Not, it wasn't a 4th down.
Funchess was like a Hail Mary look. There were
Well,
like two or so
but still,
defenders also looking
there
a lot more was going on with that play.
it was one he should have had easily, and he just didn't have it. And that was just the crux of the whole day. It was drops like that, Bryce missing, and then another just very, very bad O line performance. This was one of the worst O line performances, I think, in terms of players like Icky or the right guard we just signed, Justin McCray, to start there. Like, they were getting beaten before 1 second had come off the clock, and that's just not doable at the NFL level. But I will say the defense played pretty well. J.C. Horn had a really, really nice breakup on Chris Olave on a 3rd down bomb where
When
he was trailing and he just snuck his left hand in there and broke it up.
they showed that play on red zone, I thought it was a touchdown. I
Yeah.
legitimately thought it was a touchdown. And then just to see him like that was Josh Norman-esque. To just
Hmm.
be able to just reach out in the last second, like, nope. Like that's why we drafted him. He is that good when he's healthy. He's just not healthy.
Right, and it's nice to see him making plays again. Derek Brown had an excellent day. I think he had 10 tackles, a tackle for loss, and he had the batted pass where he actually caught his own batted pass and intercepted Derek Carr. So that was super nice. We had Horn making plays, Brown making plays. Brian Burns made a nice game check. That's about it. He didn't make a single play, and that's kind of been what he's been doing the last couple weeks. He may just be checked out at this point because he doesn't have a long-term deal here or what, but he's not playing to the level he should be at, and that may factor into his future contract negotiations down the line. But I think, and as we'll talk about for the keys of the game next week, we need all three of those guys to play to their star level, and two of them did this past week, but Burns didn't, and that's not the reason we lost, but that's a big part of why. We need all three of those guys to lock in and keep our defense whole, along with guys like Luvu and Dante Jackson, who have also been playing well.
Yeah, and that was when we were doing a preseason preview of this team and this defense was healthy. It was so many complementary pieces to the stars on the defense, and it was just
Mhm.
they got hurt right out of the gate, and then you have all the issues you have on the offensive side, and it fell apart like a house of cards. And part of that was, and this has been an ailment of this offense for pretty much this entire year. We'll get in these first and goal on the one kind of situations or 1 or 2 yard situations where we just got to pick up a couple and we run out of shotgun. And sure enough, coming right out of the gate in halftime, Miles Sanders has a really nice run, gets us down to the one, and then we immediately do a run out of shotgun. And then from there was all downhill. We end up kicking a field goal, 14-6. The rest of the game is what it is. And was interesting, I went back and every single game since the bye week, outside of 1 week, and that was the Chicago game on Thursday night, we have scored points on our opening drive in the first half. It was 3 points against Houston, a touchdown against Indy, a touchdown against Dallas, a touchdown against Tennessee, a touchdown against Tampa Bay, and a field goal against New Orleans. If you lost track at how many points that was, that's 34 points. And during that stretch of games since the bye week, we have scored 85 points. So 40% of our points have been scored on the opening drive of the second half. Like that's embarrassing to have no game plan coming into the game to be able to execute and drive and score points there. To have a 2 minute drill where you can score points and at a tight pinch, and it's frustrating. This is an abysmal offense to watch, and the only life we get is right out of the gate and after halftime, and it's just Thomas Brown is at fault. And his wife came out and tweeted like, well, somebody has to call plays, so we're here. Like, no, dude, like if you're a NFL coach, you should be coaching for like your next job. And like this is where Thomas Brown, he's got to step it up a level and get these guys that play well down the stretch, or else it's just this is going to be a cleaning house. Like I this is going to be worse than last year. Like this is down to the bare bones. Everybody's gone.
I actually think that this was Thomas Brown's best game calling plays, aside from the not like running for out of pist or out of under center and stuff on goal line plays like we should. That's just been plaguing us all year. But like I thought a lot of the stuff he called worked, but it was the receivers dropping it or the O line caving and Bryce having to scramble for it. Bryce had some really nice scramble plays
You
this
did.
game. Probably his best scrambling performance, maybe since the Texas game where he scrambled for the game-winning drive to set up the field goal. But yeah, I just thought that a lot of the stuff it was execution based, and then when we have the opportunity to execute, like say the big Miles Sanders run, probably his best play as a Panther, a nice 48-yard run, got down to maybe the one or the two. I think it was like the 1.5 yard line. Just run it under center,
Yep.
like that. This isn't even like a get cute kind of thing. This is every team in the NFL on that first down is going to run it from under center. Put in like Tremble as a fullback or something, or put in Derek Brown as a fullback, like all these other teams like to use their big defensive linemen to clear space. I haven't seen us do it once this. I haven't seen us do it since I think back when we had Don Terry Poe in 2018. I think we tried it,
Yeah,
but
I think
ever
I think
since
we did it
then,
one time then. Yeah.
yeah, we haven't done that, and I feel like that's just that's an opportunity where you have an edge you can play and you just choose not to, and that's been the crux of the Panthers' entire season.
It is, and it's not playing to our strengths. Like, why are we in
Hmm.
11 personnel when we kept 5 tight ends on the roster going into the season? Like, had we started out that Hurst and Tremble were on the field for the majority of snaps, and we were able to kind of blend Mingo and Marshall in, especially with DJ Chark out, like maybe we win a couple games at the beginning of the year that were tight down the stretch. And it's just you never know with some of that stuff. And it's going back to the offensive production. And I'm not saying this is all on Bryce. This is more just like when you watch as a fan and you want to see yards, you want to see points, you want to see your offense do something. Bryce Young's only thrown over 200 yards 4 times this year. Cam in his rookie year, he did it 12 times. And I understand Cam had a better supporting cast, different circumstances, but Stroud in Houston, he's done it 10 times this year. And heck, Will Levis in Tennessee, who's played half the year, he's done it 4 times. So it's one of those things. And again, this isn't all going back on Bryce Young. It's just one of those things. It's very frustrating to watch this offense when you can't get production through the air. We haven't had a receiver, whether that be a wide receiver, tight end, running back, go over 80 yards receiving since the bye week. Hubbard was our first 100-yard rusher on the year, and that was 2 weeks ago against Tampa Bay. Like, it's just like, what are we doing? We can't do anything right.
Yeah, that's just the point to make. It's like when there's stuff there, at just one end doesn't hold up. Bryce will miss, the receiver drops it, the O line crumbles. We're never all on the same page at once, and it's hard to get all 11 of our guys to execute. And this is the result. Yeah, just really paltry passing yards numbers and yardage and points numbers in general. But we have another week. Hopefully, we can get it right. But I'm much, much less optimistic than I was earlier in the season, where we opened against the Falcons and Saints, and I was like, "Oh, we can get a 2-0 lead to the division. This will be huge." And nope, the Panthers have ruined my enthusiasm at this point.
Yeah, no, it was we went from the rule era and we didn't think going into the year it could get any worse, and it got a lot worse really fast. Moving into because this is a situation where we're obviously going to talk about it each week, but at this point it is what it is. We're going to ride out, maybe win one game if that the rest of the way. But outside of that, yeah, it's pack up and move on to next year. Around the NFL, we're going to talk about the Rams and Ravens game. That was really tight throughout the entire game. McVay was in his bag. I think they scored on either 4 out of 5 or 4 out of 6 of their drives in the first half, and it was a 20-20 game going in the half, and it was exciting. It was something that was thrilling from start to finish.
Yeah, this was a really fun one. Both this game and the Jags Browns game, if you were watching on Red Zone, both of them bled into the 4 o'clock window, even past some of the first quarters for those games. So they were really long games and super fun to watch. But this game in particular was super fun because it went to overtime. There were a lot of crucial plays on both sides. I know you have two rookie receivers highlighted here, and I think both of them had excellent games. Puka Nakua for the Rams and Zay Flowers had the octopus at the end of the game for the Ravens to send them to overtime. They performed super well alongside all the other weapons. I thought guys like Odell Beckham and Rashad Bateman and even Isaiah Likely on that one long play were playing super well for the not the Rams, the Ravens there in this game, despite Lamar not having the cleanest game. But yeah, I thought this was just a super fun game to watch.
It was. The win probability, if you look at NFL Fast Stars model, crossed the 50% threshold 12 times this game. So it was just back and forth, back and forth. One thing to note, and this has been an issue with the Baltimore Ravens all year, especially on the offensive side, is that Lamar is leads the league in negative play rate. Like he's constantly making bad plays, turning the ball over. He had an interception. I'll say the safety wasn't necessarily on him. It was Tyler Linderbaum with just a bad snap. But it's those kind of miscues that are going to hold this team back from a Super Bowl run because they have all the pieces. They have great coaching. They have the playmakers at the skill positions, and it's a matter of just putting it all together down the stretch. Everybody is healthy, so that is a plus over the past couple years. But this was a good game. The Rams gave them their best shot, and this was a team that we thought was bottom 5 in terms of talent, and they've made it work. They're just as well a coach team as the Ravens are, and I think that was just probably the part that wasn't talked about enough was just kind of this mashup between Harbaugh and McVay.
Yeah, to me, up there with Shanahan and Mike McDaniel, McVay is one of the best play caller head coaches in the league, one of the best head coaches in general, and he really showed it this game because this is a game that I didn't think the Rams had any business being in, and they ended up sending it to overtime and needed a punt return. It wasn't even like an offensive drive touchdown for the Ravens in overtime or a defensive score. Tylan Wallace just returned a punt for a touchdown, which almost led me to a victory in fantasy this week, but ended up losing. But regardless, this was just a really fun game to watch. Close throughout the game, like you said, what 12 lead changes, or excuse me, 12 like win probability lead changes, and yeah, just super fun to watch. Couldn't get enough of this one, really.
Yeah, and it was one of the first games we've seen, and Baltimore has 3 losses on the year. That's, and they're 10-3, but those losses, they were in firm control over for most of the game. They weren't in really control of this game. This was a back and forth contest, and they were able to pull it out. Like, that kinda slugfest was something we've talked about in previous weeks. Can they win these kinda grudge matches where it's just down in the trenches, down in and down out? Can you make a play? And sure enough, Lamar down, I think it was like 5 points. It was like 28-23. They get the Zay Flowers touchdown, and then they get the 2 point conversion. They make it a 3 point game, and then Stafford drives down. He has that pretty much just. I want to say a prayer he threw up the Cooper Cup. It wasn't the best ball, but Cooper Cup makes a crazy catch on it with Marlon Humphrey well behind him because he had his ankles
Mhm.
broken. Actually, not ankles broken, just got ran right by. And that sent it to overtime. Like again, it was just one of those games where it was back and forth. And I think the Ravens can really build off of this because they play the 49ers here in a couple weeks. And they're in contention for that first seed with the Miami loss on Monday night. So this is something to kind of keep track of. This would lend itself to the Lamar Jackson MVP argument that you made in the preseason. So all in all, like you said, a great game, and it was one of the better 1 o'clock games that we had this past week.
Yeah, absolutely. The 1 o'clock window, it wasn't too bad, but I wasn't a huge fan outside of this game, the Jags Browns game, which was horrible game, but it was fun at the end. And then the other NFC South game was pretty close too, the Falcons and Buccaneers. But overall, I think this was the best one, and glad we got to talk about it.
Yeah, and with that, we're gonna move in the coach talk. We want to talk about two coaches we're kind of down on right now. I don't know if hot seat's really the term. It's more just after the past 2 weeks, where are these franchises going? Are they going to be able to pivot from this? And the first guy, and this is a guy that you wrote down, is Mike Tomlin. He's on a 2 game skid. He loses at home to Arizona and then New England within a 5 day span, and those are two of you'd probably argue two of the bottom five teams in the league, and you lose at home to them when you're trying to make a push for the playoffs. That doesn't send a lot of hope to your fans. It doesn't inspire a lot of hope for your team. What do you think Mike Tomlin has to do to kind of turn this around down the stretch?
Well, yeah, I want to preface it by saying I don't think he's on the hot seat. Kind of like what you were saying. It's just you lose to probably two of the three or four worst teams. Obviously, the Panthers are the worst, and then you throw the Giants in there too. But yeah, at home, within 5 days as well, because they played on Thursday this past week with the Patriots, and you allow now the Cardinals' offense isn't like the worst, but they have Kyler Murray who's coming off injury. They don't have all the weapons in the world. You allow them to beat you, and then you allow Bailey Zappi, and I'm not a big fan of Bailey Zappi. You allow him to score, him and the Patriots rather, to score 21 points on you at home on Thursday. Now
He had
I
three
know you're
passing
playing.
touchdowns. Give him some prop. But I'm messing with you.
I mean,
Continue.
he did have an interception as well. He's good for one interception a game, but no, it's like, and I know you had Mitch Trubisky and stuff too, and they probably could have won the game at the end of the game had Trubisky not sent a football to the moon on 4th and 1. But like these are losses, like you're saying, when they're in playoff contention, when they're in a division that's as tough as the AFC North, who I'm looking at the standings right now, it's still pretty easily the best division in the AFC at least. If you're in a division like that in contention for the playoffs, these are must win easy home games for you. And they've just come up short in both of them. And looking at the standings now, I believe they are out of the playoff picture right now. They're either out or the seventh seed, like with the Colts and the Bills, because they're not winning the division currently.
I think the
And the
Colts
Browns
have the
are ahead of
tiebreaker
them.
right now, but I may be wrong.
Yeah.
And they actually play at Indy this week. That's what's actually
Right.
very interesting about the Pittsburgh matchup is they're kind of vying for that 7th seed right now.
Right, and we talked about early in the season when they were, what was it, 6-2 or something like that. When we're like, oh, the Steelers they're excellent, but look at their point differential. Look at all the differential. They're like negative 200 in this. They've been outgained by yardage in every game. That kind of stuff. It seems like that kind of stuff is like catching up to them, having a bit of negative regression, or I guess positive regression to that point. And I wonder if Mike Tomlin and the Steelers are going to be able to sustain that because we've known. Tomlin's teams as being teams that are at 500 or above throughout his entire career. And like before the season, there was even talk of maybe the Steelers want to move on from Tomlin and stuff like that. But I just wonder if they're going to be able to keep up with the rest of that division, given these two pretty bad losses.
Yeah, and I wonder because Trubisky led the Steelers in passing in both the Cardinals and the Patriots games because Pickett went out during that Arizona game. Is that if that's really the difference? And I'm not saying Kenny Pickett's a difference maker, but he's probably better than Trubisky. He has more rapport with guys like George Pickens, and I want to say Deontay Johnson in this offense. And you're coming up against a tough slate, like you said. Like those were two gimmies that you need to have. Like there's a difference between being 7-6 right now and 9-3, 9-4. My bad.
9-4, yeah.
And so they're going to be at Indy this week. Then they're going to host Cincy, and then they're on the road the last two games of the season in Seattle and then in Baltimore. So if Baltimore doesn't have the number one seed wrapped up by week 18, you can't pencil that in as a dub. So it's like you almost got to win three out of the next four games, and I don't know if I can do that if I'm talking about the Steelers honestly. Like maybe two games, but I don't see them going 3-1.
Yeah, and those late season Baltimore games are real wars with them in Pittsburgh. So like even if they have the one seed locked up, Baltimore that is, Tyler Huntley can go in there and give them some really good football. So I
Yep.
like even if they're not playing their starters, I don't know if that's a win. So like
And Mike McDonald, yeah, he's a phenomenal defensive coordinator, so he's going to have those backups playing hard. And it's Mitchell Trubisky, like it's one of those things like they're going to probably get after him and boost their resumes. So it's I respect you putting Mike Tomlin's name on here. He has to do something about the offense in the offseason. I know about midseason, a lot of people were linking Kirk Cousins with the Steelers organization. If they bring in a new play caller and they're able to get like a veteran in there, bolster their offensive line throughout the draft, they have receivers on the outside to where they could make it work and have like a 2-year window if we want to talk about that.
I mean, hell, look what a guy we're gonna talk about soon in best performances is doing with the Browns. Like they could have brought in a Joe Flacco maybe and been a bit better off, but no, I'm just kidding. But the next coach we want to talk about, who's been on a bit of a 2 week downward spiral, he captains the Philadelphia Eagles defense, which when you think of the Eagles defense, you think of it as a strong unit because last year they were a good unit. Their D line is pretty dominant. They flexed their D line even this week with a Jalen Carter. That was at a fumble six where he was moving
Yep.
down the field. Have a bunch of draft capital invested in that defensive line. High first round, high end draft capital. But the defense actually has given up a ton of points this year, and that's Sean Desai, the Eagles defensive coordinator.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to bring them up. We talked about before the Eagles played this kind of like gauntlet of a 5-game skid where they hosted Dallas, they were on the road to KC, they were home against Buffalo, they were home against San Francisco, and then they were on the road to Dallas. And we were honestly thinking they'd be 2-3, 3-2 coming out of it, and they started 3-0, won a couple games that they probably should haven't, and then they got beat by two of the better teams in the league. And there's definitely stuff to be concerned about, but it's important to remember that they lost Kazir White and TJ Edwards in the offseason, and they also lost their linebackers coach Nick Rawlis when Jonathan Gannon left to Arizona. So the linebacking core was weak as is. And then you have your stud linebacker out of Georgia, N'Kobe Dean. He's out. I think he's on IR for the rest of the year. So you got these kind of just backup dudes in your linebacking core, and they've just been absolutely shredded. And it's one of those things that Sean Desai needs to take a page out of Brian Flores' book, where it's like he doesn't have a lot of talent on that defense, but they play together, they play succinctly, and it's one of those things where you either bring the house, you get after the quarterback, or you're dropping 8 guys. And if you have so much talent on the defensive line like the Eagles do, you got to trust 3 guys getting after the quarterback and drop more guys in the coverage. We see it with Raheem Morris in LA. The priority of we are not going to give you an explosive play. You can dink and dunk all day, but we will rally and tackle, and you will not beat us deep. And it's just one of those concepts that I think Desai needs to incorporate, especially down the stretch if they want to be competitive.
I couldn't agree more there. I think what Flores is doing in Minnesota should be talked about more because he has that defense playing not lights out, but much better than the some of their parts. or their parts. They are the sum of
It's a
their
vast
parts.
improvement the last year, and they lost talent. Like
Right, that
this is the
entire D
team that
line,
doesn't
yeah.
have Dalvin Tomlinson. They traded who was their one edge rusher?
Zadarius
It was
Smith.
Yep, I was about to say Daniil Hunter, but I was like, he's still there. He's still wrecking
He
havoc. But it's
requested a trade in the offseason.
yeah.
Yeah.
But he's still with the team, and I'm sure he loves playing for Brian Flores and the aggressive style that he plays with. He's had a great year. I think he's top 10 in sacks in the NFL. So it's one of those things that I think that's a mutual symbiotic relationship between the two.
Yeah,
But
and,
move
the Eagles have much more talent on that D line, and they've allowed, excuse me, 321 points this season. Do you wanna guess where that ranks in the league?
I would assume that's got to be around 20th.
They have allowed the 5th most points this season, the Philadelphia Eagles.
Oh,
And
so flip. So that would okay.
yeah,
I got
yeah.
you.
So,
Got
yeah, it'd be 12th, in your regard, but yeah, 5th most points, only teams that have allowed more, the Commanders, the Cardinals, the Panthers, and there was an AFC team, the Colts.
you. Okay.
But they're 10 and 3 to this point, so they aren't, like, horrible or anything, it's just they've been, like, showing cracks all year with stuff like, and we were talking about this before recording, stuff like the Vikings game where Kirk Cousins was on fire, scored 28, but they won that one. Both Commanders games, the Commanders scored 31 and the Eagles outscored them and won. But games like the Jets game where they allowed the Jets to score 20, I think that was still Zach Wilson at the time. The
Yeah.
Patriots scored 20 on, opening day. It's stuff like that that's culminated where we had
Well,
this
these play
five-game
callers
gauntlet. Well, yeah, but
rank 19th. Like this isn't a good coaching staff, and like you said, there are holes on this roster.
right, and we were talking about a couple of weeks ago. I think actually when we had Dylan Jackson on, we talked about the Eagles' upcoming gauntlet per se, where it was Cowboys, Chiefs, Bills, Niners, Cowboys again. And the Eagles won 3 of those first games. They beat the Cowboys by 5, 23-28. They beat the Chiefs. They came from behind and beat them. The Chiefs only scored 17, and we've talked about the Chiefs' offensive struggles. And then the Bills scored 34 and lost in overtime. That was the Hurts
Yep.
heroics in overtime. And then we come to the 49ers and Cowboys again, where the 49ers score 42 on them in at the link in Philly, and then the Cowboys score 33 at home at AT&T Stadium, and it's not Dallas, it's the town just right next to Dallas. So like it,
Arlington, right? Yeah.
Arlington, yeah, you're right. So it seems like this the crack like the dam's finally breaking, I think, on that defense, and points are starting to pile up. And while they don't have the hardest schedule ever for the like throughout the rest of the season, they are going to Seattle next week, and I kind of like the Seahawks offense. The Seahawks offense wasn't too bad even with Drew Lock this past week. And then they have the Giants twice and the Cardinals. But if they want to kind of regain that number one standing in their own division and in the NFC as a whole, I think the defense does need to tighten up.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. It's not so much about how the season ends. It's a matter
Hmm.
of okay, even if you get the number one seed, if San Francisco or Dallas comes to the link, are you able to stop them? Any which way, because you only need a few stops in the game, and you need your offense to go nuclear. But again, the Cowboys and 49ers have solid defenses, so that's not something you can always count on in those matchups, and that's something that they're just going to have to go back to the drawing board and figure out what works and what doesn't.
Right. Yeah, that was my main point. Yeah, like I don't think either coach that we talked about should be on the hot seat, but like you're saying, when you see them in the playoffs, like even if even if they don't have the one seed, are they going to go to Santa Clara and stop the 49ers? Nobody really has so far, except for Brian Flores. And then the Cowboys, they played a close game that first time within 5 points, but the Cowboys blew them out this past time. So I don't know.
Yeah, and it's definitely going to be interesting because, like you said, I think they're going to tighten up during this next 4 game stretch. They don't play the gauntlet that they have. They're going to look better before the playoffs, and you just hope that whatever they do to clean some stuff up, it works. Because if it doesn't, it's going to be you get to the divisional round, you get to the conference championship, and then you're done. And that's just not something you want to see as a team that's trying to go back to the Super Bowl, that's trying to win the ring. And we'll see how that plays out. I think they're a top 5 team still in the NFL or borderline to it. They're for sure top 10, and it's just one of those things. Can they put it together and make a run?
Absolutely. And to shift more towards a positive light, we got to do our best performances. And you had a pretty good theme this week for our best performances. Usually we do like wide receivers or quarterbacks or edge rushers, but you chose backup quarterbacks this week. And I thought that was interesting because the first guy we have is Jake Browning, who led his team to a victory at home over the Indianapolis Colts. And both of these teams are kind of vying for maybe that wild card spot, that 6 or 7 spot. And Browning really, he did what he needed to do. Granted, there were a lot of yak yards, like with
A
Chase
lot of
Brown, the
screens.
backup running back, and Joe Mixon. Yeah, a lot of screens, but they had some nice downfield stuff. Like the one, it's like 45, 46 yards to T. Higgins was nice, where he had to adjust. There was a lot of receivers having to adjust for the ball in the air this week, but he played a nice game. Only one interception, so not too bad there.
Yeah, no, he was solid. He was going up against another backup in Gardner Minshew, who's been serviceable this year. But to kind of keep with the pace of this list, all of the guys that we have on here also won the game. So their stats aren't necessarily mind blowing. Jake Browning only threw for 275 yards, 2 touchdowns. The next guy on here is probably the most impressive from kind of those just like raw stats, and that's Joe Flacco. He had 311 yards, 3 touchdowns. He did have an interception, but he's honestly been arguably the best Cleveland Browns quarterback this year. If we're talking about 2023 guys who have started a game, whether it's be Deshaun Watson, whether it be PJ Walker, whether it be Dorian Thompson Robinson or DTR, as some people know him, I Flacco's been the best out of them, and whatever him and Kevin Stefanski are doing in terms of being on the same page, if they can keep that rolling, this defense is good enough to carry them in the playoffs. And this is a team that I don't think anybody wants to play in the playoffs. If we're being honest, like their defensive line, their wide receivers, like they aren't necessarily elite, but I mean, you got Amari Cooper, you got Elijah Moore, you got David Njoku, you had David Bell with a fourth down touchdown this past game. It's a lot of
David
different.
Njoku this game, man, he went absolutely insane mode. Like 2 touchdowns, the one crazy catch. But yeah, like you're saying, Flacco's been incredible. This is a guy that I believe he's 38 years old, wasn't playing at all this year and came off the couch and he got to work. And you said, what is Stefanski and Flacco doing that's clicking? He's throwing downfield. I saw a tweet after his first game, so prior to the game we're talking about, where it was he had the highest or not yeah, the highest or furthest depth of target of any Browns QB in the last 5 years. He's thrown it downfield to those guys, to Amari Cooper, to Elijah Moore, to Cedric Tillman, their rookie, and he's connecting with them, and that's what's working for him. Now, granted, they didn't beat the Rams in Flacco's first game, but they beat a Jags team which put up some points at the end of the game. Now, Trevor Lawrence was injured and didn't have the greatest game, but they
I
ended
want to
up
know what
pulling that
he's
game
on.
off.
I want to know what
Oh,
he's on. I saw 2 or 3 scrambles from him where I said, "Ain't no way!" Like Patrick Mahomes had an ankle sprain, and you could tell he had a sprain. But I don't know what he's on. I know Lawrence said the day after that he felt amazing, and that was probably the narcotics speaking, not him. But again, it's one of those things that you just wonder, like, is it actually a concern his ankle, or is he just that pumped full of drugs that it doesn't matter?
yeah, no, he wasn't feeling his ankle at any point before, during, or after that game. He was on morphine too or something like that. But the next guy on our list, he was a starter and then became a backup. Now he's a starter again, but he did spend time as a backup this season, so he
There was some
qualifies.
drama. There was some
Yeah,
drama leading
yeah.
up to this game. You had Aaron Rodgers talking about this on Pat McAfee's show, and it was weird. It's just everything about this is kind of weird. Like I understand Zach Wilson's concern, like, hey, you bench me, now you're starting me, like make a decision. Like that's fair from
Mhm.
like a player, but it's like if you didn't want to be benched, then play better. And that's exactly what he did. He came out, he proved the haters wrong, had a solid game, 301 yards, 2 touchdowns. I mean, like again, it's the Texans. They aren't like the best defense in the world, but it was a solid win at home.
No, I think he had a great game. And it was raining too, and it was the MetLife turf, so we can't take anything away from him there because that's probably the worst conditions you can have in a football field. But yeah, extremely efficient through the air, 27 to 36, like you said, 300 yards, 2 touchdowns, and no real mistakes. That was the key one for me. This was a fun game to watch because at halftime it was 0-0, and we were like, oh, this game's horrible, right? Like, is it gonna end 3-0 or something crazy like that?
Yeah,
But
I don't know what game ever ended in that score, but yeah, no, Zach
yeah,
Wilson, like you said, he came out in the second half. They had answers on offense, and they got the ball to their playmakers. I mean, Garrett Wilson, Brees Hall, like those guys were making plays, and I think it was an out route we were watching, and you're like, oh, what a dart! And you're right, like
yeah.
putting an outside route in terms of on the money, in progression, like that's the kind of stuff you want to see from a quarterback because that's what's going to allow you to turn the franchise over to him in a couple years when Rodgers does retire.
And and here was the kicker. I saw it after the game, and he had said something. I guess during his post game interview about somebody asked him about playing loose, and you seem a lot more confident. He said, "What are they going to do? Bench me again?" And he's exactly right. Like he had been at rock bottom with like them having to trade for Rodgers and everything, benching him for I already forget the
Tim
dude's name.
Boyle,
That Tim Boyle, who is one of the worst QBs like ever
he
statistically
was
in
Rodgers'
college.
boy. Would you
Yeah.
believe it that half that roster is because of Rodgers? Like Mr.
Hey,
GM. We talk about
eh,
LeBron being a general manager. Aaron Rodgers is in the same discussion.
Randall Cobb had a touchdown this week. That's all I gotta say. But no, but like, he's exactly right. What are they gonna do? Bench me again? And that I guess that gave him the confidence he needed. And he went out and I don't want to say like dominated because he didn't have like 500 yards, 5 touchdowns or anything, but he outperformed most people that we see play on MetLife turf, especially in the rain.
Yeah. No, I mean, he outperformed Mahomes earlier in prime time, and that was the thing. He shows out in these big time games, and then he kind of dissipated for a little bit. And having more games like this is going to boost his confidence, which is a huge part of playing the quarterback position. And it's also going to give him experience to become the starter because just like we're seeing with Jordan Love, who's been in the year several years, he'll have up and down games in this first year as a starter. And he's just working out those kinks, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't, and that's something you can build upon, and that's hopeful for a guy that was the number 2 overall pick and looked to be a bust. If he can have kind of like that Alex Smith trajectory where it was rough coming out of the gate but he becomes a viable starter, I think that's a great place for him to land, especially with I'm not going to say he has the best arm in the world, but he has the ability to drop a couple like moon balls, and that's critical sometimes when you're trying to make those big plays and in big moments.
Yeah, for sure. And then the last guy we want to talk about is another New York slash New Jersey quarterback. Emphasis on the New Jersey part.
You
That's
saw his
Tommy
agent on the
DeVito.
field, right? You saw his
Yeah,
agent.
his mafioso agent. Yeah, Tommy DeVito. Now he only had 150 yards or 158 yards passing and 1 touchdown, but he was moving on the ground to 10 carries for 71 yards, getting the win over the Green Bay Packers. This was a game I thought the Packers would win pretty easily. I don't know about you, but they had
Yeah.
been surging. They just beat the Chiefs. I thought that they would build off of this their win last week and come in and get a win, but Jordan Love didn't have the best game, and the Giants were able to take advantage of it.
Yeah, no, this was something that's been underneath the radar over the past couple weeks. The Giants have pulled out a couple games. They're still a gritty team. Like that's people like dismiss this because they had the rough start. They've had injuries to key positions. But this is a well-coached team with Brian Dable, Martindale. You have Mike Kafka from Andy Reid's tree. So you have a lot of ideas flowing through that building. And at the end of the day, they're still a solid team. So it was
Yeah,
very, very cool to see them kind of pull off the upset at home last night.
after the 49-17 shellacking the Cowboys gave them, they're 3-0. They beat the Commanders 31-19. They barely beat the Patriots and now they barely beat the Packers, but those are some I don't want to say like just meaningless wins. Like the Patriots one's pretty meaningless, but beating the Commanders in it's not what in Washington, we'll say I forget where their stadium is too, and then
It
beating the
is.
Packers at home. Those
It's
are
the DMV
meaningful
area.
for yeah, the DMV area, Andover, or it's not Andover. It's something in Maryland, but regardless, back on topic. Getting these wins going into next season where we thought this season was lost, right? Daniel Jones looked horrible. There was nothing clicking on offense. Saquon was getting stymied by a lot of defenses. But putting together some wins here at the end of the year when they can go into next year with, all right, well, if we can't have Daniel Jones, we have not a reliable, like a good choice and a backup where we can fall back to if we don't want to go the quarterback route. Or if we do want to go the quarterback route, maybe we get a Jaden Daniels in the draft or something like that. Or even with this, like, hey, stuff is working on offense. Our defense is clicking with Wink Martindale. Maybe we can draft a good receiver like Malik Neighbors or something like that and get going for next year. These are the kind of wins that inspire confidence, no matter which route you choose to go in the draft in the offseason.
Yeah, it's boosting the fact that what Joe Shine and Brian Dable and what this organization is trying to do on the field is working. And this is a project that takes a couple years for a rebuild. And it's a little bit different in New York than what's going on in Minnesota. And it's very cool to kind of see those organizations kind of parallel to each other. Both of them have kind of these interesting quarterback situations. They don't have elite quarterbacks. Like that's one of the things that I think if those teams had elite quarterbacks, we'd talk about them in a different breath, different tier. And it's really cool to see because if, like you said, Giants draft Jaden Daniels, they develop him, they have Daniel Jones on the book one more year, and all of a sudden, okay, maybe they have this electric RPO offense with Jaden Daniels, and they kind of take over the NFC East, and that would be cool to see. I don't know if that's what we'll see, but it's one of those things that, like you said, it inspires a lot of hope for the organization, for the team, for the fans, and that's exciting for New York.
Yeah, for sure. And we want to go into our MVP watch here. It's going to be more of the same, right? It's the same three guys we had last week, I believe. And at
You
the
you
top,
wanted you wanted to put this guy at number one, so go
oh,
for
to me, it was mainly a joke, but to me,
it.
it's still going to be down to Dak and Brock Purdy. Right now, the Niners do have the number one seed in the NFC, I believe. Yes, they do. And to me, it's going to come down to can Dak, number one, keep the hold on his division, like win the division outright, and yeah, that's about it. I think if they win the division and he gets the 1 or 2 seed, he has a good chance of winning it because he has the counting stats argument that we talked about last week. Whereas Brock Purdy has all the efficiency metrics under his belt, and currently the Niners are. Because they beat him earlier in the season, they have the tiebreaker. So currently they're ahead there. If they keep it up, he's going to have a good case too. But I do think between those two, Dak probably deserves it.
Yeah, so as of so betting odds last week when we had this conversation, Purdy was number one. After Dak and the shellacking the Cowboys gave the Eagles on Sunday Night Football, he's now moved up to that number one conversation. It goes back to the point you said, who's going to end up with the number one seed? Because it seems like if either one of these teams do, that's kind of their legitimacy case for MVP. Now, what I will say about Brock Purdy, and because a lot of people will throw out, well, he's one of the most efficient quarterbacks we've seen in the modern era. That's absolutely right. We talked about kind of his loaded cast. Talked about last week when some of those pieces went down, how that offense started to look average. But a guy that I think is very fitting to compare to, and this was back in 2013. It was Nick Foles within the Eagles offense. And I want to talk about that Eagles offense because they had Deshaun Jackson, they had a prime Brent Selleck, they had Shady McCoy. On the offensive line, they had Jason Peters, they had rookie Lane Johnson, they had Jason Kelsey. Like this was a really, really good supporting cast for a quarterback in, I believe it was Chip Kelly's system at the time. And it was one of those things that it worked. It was clicking. His EPA per play through 14 weeks was 0.344, and Purdy's right now is 0.386. And if you look at their average depth of target, how far down the field they're throwing the ball, Nick Foles that year had a dot of 9.5, and this year Purdy has one of 8.1. So again, Nick Foles didn't win the MVP that year, and rightfully so. Like he wasn't the best quarterback. He put up some great statistics. He was one of the most efficient quarterbacks in the league, but that doesn't make you an MVP. If Sam Darnold comes in and replaces Brock Purdy, that the 49ers still have a legitimate chance to win the Super Bowl. If Dak Prescott goes down, the Cowboys are not going to win the Super Bowl. Like Cooper Rush can win you a game or two. He's not winning in the postseason. And that's the difference, I think, when you look at those two guys, is how important are they to their team's success in this push for the number one seed?
First of all, don't disrespect Super Bowl MVP Nick Foles. All right,
He's a legend.
he is a legend, a Philly legend in his own right, and Also, last year I believe Purdy was 1-1 in the playoffs. Correct? They beat
He
the
was.
Seahawks and then lost to the Eagle. Well, he went
He got
out in
hurt.
that
Yeah.
game against the Eagles. Yeah. But yeah, I agree. Yeah, just the points I made earlier. It's going to come down to quarterback on the number one seed, in my opinion. Because like we're talking about, Purdy has the efficiency metrics, which dating all the way back to whenever, like 2011 or 2010, whenever we want to look at the kind of modern era with the new CBA and everything, whoever leads in EPA wins the MVP. The only exception was Cam Newton, of course, and he absolutely deserved it that year. So that's a factor to consider. But then Dak is leading the league in passing touchdowns, I believe. I also think he's up there in yards. It might be CJ Stroud still, but he's up there for sure. There, he beats Purdy in both interceptions, like fewer interceptions thrown, more touchdowns thrown, stuff like that. So he has the counting stats to it. Like it's a narrative award, is what it is, Steve, and it's going to come
It
down
is.
to that number one seed because the Niners already beat the Cowboys this year. That's the kind of the thing that I think the voters are going to go back to and be like, oh, these really two close QBs. They have the same records. They're tied, but why are the Niners ahead? Oh, the Niners beat them. That's something we got to consider. Even though Dak isn't playing against Purdy, you know,
Yep.
it's just it's a narrative award, is what it is. And with that comes stuff like this, like stuff you don't really need to consider, but is going to be considered.
It is going to be considered, and I think the only thing that would be interesting in terms of a shift is when you saw Debo and Trent Williams go down during that three-game
Mhm.
skid when they lost to Cleveland, they lost to Cincinnati, they lost to Minnesota. They played Dallas or Philly during that stretch. I think we're talking about this in a completely different light because I think at that point the other team wins, and that changes some of this narrative talk. And like you said, when these two quarterbacks go head to head, they aren't playing each other. Dak was facing Tre'Davious Ward and that 49ers defense, and they had the ability to lock down some stuff. Ward's out right now. And so if they face up again and the 49ers don't have some of their key pieces, maybe it's a different outcome. And that's what we're going to have to see come January.
Yeah, I don't think Dak wants to see the Niners in the playoffs after the last two times with that, but that remains to be seen. The third guy we had was a guy, not a quarterback, Tyreek Hill. We talked about him, maybe triple crowning, maybe hitting 2,000, but I think his margin for error in the MVP race, which was already slim, is even slimmer now. He got I don't know what injury he had last night, but he tweaked something, and yeah, I just don't know if he's going to be on pace for leading the league in all three categories or hitting that 2K mark, which I believe would have put him over the top in some voters' minds. So just an unfortunate situation there.
If he is able to go and he has a couple home run games down the stretch, and I understand we're really at that last 4 game pivot point, but he is at his current trajectory going to break 2K. But he's got to stay at that current trajectory, which is about like 120 yards receiving a game. The receptions number will be interesting because the only guy I think he was behind was Keenan Allen. So if he can jump him now with Justin Herbert out, he's got the lead in yards and touchdowns. So those goals are still there. It's just with a bad Monday night performance, like you said, he's dealing with some sort of injury. That's what has him dropped from the betting markets on our list. And it's one of those things that it would be cool to see him win it, but it's looking more and more unlikely.
Yeah, and it's super unfortunate, right? Because we talked throughout the season once we started the MVP watch segment that this was kind of a weaker race. I do think Dak has kind of stepped into the role of a deserving quarterback that deserves it. But we thought that this might be a year where we see a wide receiver win it or a running back like Christian McCaffrey win it. But with him fading down the stretch and McCaffrey's touchdown streak broken, I do think it's going to revert back to the quarterback. And I'm not saying Dak doesn't deserve it, but it is disappointing not to see maybe better players like Tyreek Hill be considered for it.
Yeah, no, and it's one of those years. It's a down year for quarterback play. It'd be cool to see a guy get in. That's what we saw with Adrian Peterson back in 2012, which was really cool to see. When a couple of these guys have some really, like you said, well-deserving seasons that are historical in their own rights, get the credit that they deserve. Now, this week does not feature an MVP candidate. It actually doesn't feature a lot of Pro Bowl candidates. But the Carolina Panthers will host the Atlanta Falcons at Bank of America Stadium. Um, To your point, it goes back to our defensive stars playing like stars. I have no doubt that Evero will keep this offense somewhat contained. My question is, can we do anything offensively? We struggled against the Falcons in Week 1, and that doesn't seem like it'll change against Ryan Nielsen and that group on the defensive side.
If you remember week 1 and our very first drive, we actually drove down the field. I believe we got it to the maybe like the 20 or the 15. It was a 4th and 1 and it was halfback dive and Chuba didn't get it. And then the rest of the game from there went downhill. But that very first drive, we were actually moving the ball quite well. And I wonder if we can do something similar this week. You talk about Evero holding their offense back this week. Ritter had kind of a decent game last week. He
It
did have
was
a couple
against the
misses.
Bucks defense.
Right, but what did we do against the Bucks defense?
We
Like
put up 18 points, which is pretty solid considering we're
all right,
averaging, I think,
that's
about 12 points a game.
that. All right, you're right there. But their offense, like Ritter, he threw that one to Kyle Pitts, the wide open bomb. He ran one in on his yeah, on his own. Bijan ran one in. Young Ku continued his kicking streak. So like they didn't have a horrible game last weekend. We are deeper into the season than that week 1 game. So I do think both teams should be a little better. But like you said, my keys for this game are all three defensive stars have to lock in, not just JC Horn, not just Derek Brown, not just Brian Burns. All three of them have to make a difference alongside guys like Luvu and Dante Jackson, who coming off his injury, Dante Jackson has actually been playing very, very well. This past week, he didn't allow a single catch. I believe it was on 6 targets. So he's locked in on his side of the field, but we need that. And then on the offensive side of the ball, we talked about all three phases: offensive line, quarterback, receiver. None of them were ever on the same page. Just all three of them, please lock in for even the routine plays, like the ones where Bryce puts it on the guys like right on his hands. All you have to do is catch it. Like we don't need 50 yards of yak or something like that because we know our receivers can't get that. So when he puts it on the money, we have to catch it. Bryce, when Mingo's running wide open, you have to hit him for that touchdown. Then the O line, they just they have to hold up like an NFL O line, and I don't know if that's going to be the case, but we're going to need that for some plays because, like you said, this Falcons defense with Ryan Nielsen coming from the Saints, they have some of those Saints influences on their D line, and they're going to do some stunts and stuff to try to mess with us. So hopefully they
And
can lock in.
you just hope is that like James Campen can get in the ear of some of these guys, even with kind of the backup interior that we're dealing with at the moment. And it's just like Chuba has had honestly back-to-back games that have been fairly solid. Like he's almost had 200 total like rushing yards between the Tampa Bay New Orleans game. If we can get him active in the run game, we can get some bootlegs off of that. Like you said, Mingo and Bryce get on the same page. Chark isn't dropping stuff that's hitting him in the face mask. Thielen's doing his part like he has done all year. It's when you get all those together and you eliminate mistakes, which Bryce did a better job of that in New Orleans. It was just kind of the supporting cast and stuff that happened around him. Um, we have a shot and we'll have a shot because Desmond Ritter is a guy that we held under 200 passing yards the first game. And that's something that Evero did to Kirk Cousins and a couple other quarterbacks, especially at Bank of America. So I expect the passing game for the Falcons to be eliminated or erased for the most part. It's Bijan Robinson that has my kind of concern. But with YGM back, with Derek Brown in there, with Shy Tuttle there, you hope that the run game will be mitigated from there and Burns doesn't get himself ejected to where they're just running like wide receiver reverses because we can't set the edge. So it's stuff like that where it's just don't make the mental errors. And I think if we do that, we do our job. There's a shot. It's not a good shot, but there's a shot we could win.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's been a shot every week, and we've just not taken advantage of it. But we do need to win a division game, at least one, going into next year. And I think we've got one this week where we can win it. But moving forward, talking about next year, there was only one college game this week. It was Army Navy. I didn't watch that one. Full disclosure, because I didn't want to see. I think it was 17-11,
I
or
think the
maybe
over
17 to
hit
13.
on it,
The over hit because the very last play was a safety. I don't know
but it
why they
hit.
took a safety, but yeah, the over did hit. I think the last 12 years or 13 years, it was 12 unders and one over. Now we get another over. But you asked, or I asked you coming into this week, what position did you want to focus on for the Panthers draft at 33 because that's our highest pick currently. We have a lot of work to do, and I know a lot of fans want us to go wide receiver, rightfully so, because our receiving core is just atrocious. But you said offensive tackles, and I think that's interesting because our offensive tackle play has been down this year. We've talked about Ike Ekwonu at length. He's just not playing at the level he was drafted at. Taylor Moton has been solid, but these past couple games, there have been plays where he's starting to wane, where all four other guys are being beaten, and so he's being left on an island. And eventually, he's going to wear down and let somebody by, and that happened a couple times this game. So you asked me to do offensive tackles this week, and I think this is a very good offensive tackle class up front. I think there's four for sure first round locks, so I'm not going to talk about them. Those are Olu Fashanu and Joe Watt from Michigan and Joe Watt, Notre Dame. And then JC Latham, Alabama, right tackle, and Talize Fuoga from Oregon State. Both of those guys are right tackles, but I do think they'll be first round locks. So I don't want to talk about those guys. Although if
So
any of them
who
fell,
who do you
I would love for them to be Panthers, but they're just not going to fall.
obviously those guys aren't going to fall, but I remember a couple years ago when we were having the should it be Icky, should it be Evan Neal, and you had in your grading that Charles Cross was probably the best pass protector, and I think
Hmm.
when we're trying to get Bryce Young to drop back more, for him to follow kind of that Drew Brees arc where the ball does come out of his hands quickly, but he's got a solid O line. Who do you think is going to be there, kind of in the second round at pick 33, that offers the most upside in that department?
Well, I do think there's going to be a couple guys there that I'll talk about, but a lot of them have inside out versatility. Like the guy here at the bottom, Graham Barton, he was Duke's left tackle, but I think he'll be an interior guy at the next level. I know Dane Brugler from the Athletic is also uh, echoed that statement or that sentiment. He thinks he'll play center actually, which is kind of bizarre going from left tackle to center. But the guy I want to focus on mainly for our pick at 33 is Jordan Morgan. He was the left tackle at Arizona this year. And Arizona under the radar had a very good season. They were 9-3. They competed against a lot of teams. They lost to USC in overtime. That was one of their three losses. And they beat a lot of good Pac-12 teams. The Pac-12 was pretty good this year. But Morgan, back to his point, he's a guy that reminds me a lot of Charles Cross. He's very intelligent and patient. He kind of, if I go back to my Charles Cross notes, Cross would kind of mirror what the defensive lineman was trying to do, like the path he was trying to take, and stay with it and stay in front of him. That's what Jordan Morgan does. He's a good striker with his arms. Doesn't do both at once, doesn't offset him or anything. Puts one where it needs to go, puts the other on the shoulder. He has strong arms. He doesn't let go once he has the guy, and he's a really good puller and mover in the run game, which is something that I think our offense needs to use more because we were a confident power run team last year. We've harped on it every week during our Panthers doom scrolling session where we talk about how we're not doing power runs. He was able to run the ball well, and he's able to handle speed rushing well, which is the bane of Icky's existence. Those quick guys, when they do the chop, just get right around him. Jordan Morgan's able to adapt to that pretty well. And so this is a guy that I would like highly consider at pick 33 should he fall, because you see, other than those four guys, I have six guys listed here. Offensive tackle is a position that gets pushed up in the draft, right?
Yeah.
Where if you're picking like let's say 20 through 32, you may not have a first round grade on the guy because you only have 15 to 20 first round grades. But if you need a tackle, that's a position that's going to get pushed up, kind of like edge rusher. We saw last year a lot of edge rushers get snuck in at the end of the first round. Tackle is like that too. And hopefully Jordan Morgan's a guy that can fall to 33 because that's a guy I would love to have. My only main knock against Morgan is that he doesn't possess great speed to get to the second level, like in run blocking. But that's something you can work around with tight ends and stuff like that. So to me, sitting at 33, he would be the home run pick for the Panthers, in my opinion.
I think if we go Jordan Morgan, and I'm not saying he's a similar player to the two guys I want to mention, but you had Tyler Smith, who was a late first round pick for the Cowboys a
Hmm.
couple years, and he's been a versatile player between a guard and a tackle position. You had, and I believe the same draft that Icky and Neal and Charles Cross went, you had Bernard Raymond going to the Colts in the third round, and he's
Yes.
been a solid left tackle. And it's one of those things that even though these aren't like the top four guys that you think are going to go off the board, they get a guy of his value and then maybe have the ability to move Icky in the guard because I think Icky would be better as a guard. Would give us more depth on the offensive line. It would give us a better left tackle. And it's one of those things that it would hopefully make everybody else around you better. Now, it does have a concern on the wide receiver side. We aren't adding playmakers, but like you said, this is a deep wide receiver class. We saw a lot of wide receivers go in the third and fourth round that have been productive this year. So we can get those guys, bring in a veteran, kind of boost the room that way. This offense can turn around. We've seen this before. We were 2-14 after 2010. We added a couple necessary pieces. Yes, Cam was one of them, but we turned around and we were top 10 offense. So it's definitely doable to turn this around. It's just going to have to be done the right way, and I think Jordan Morgan is a great way to start.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think left tackle is the only spot we need. It's pretty clear the interior is a problem as well. And that's a guy like Graham Barton that I mentioned was Duke's left tackle. He's played at a bunch of positions throughout his career. He's a guy that I have currently, like if he were to go as an interior guy, he'd be late first round. And we need help at both guard spots. So that's a guy that I would consider there at 33 as well. And I do think he can play tackle in the league, but I think he would be an excellent guard at the next level.
Yeah. And with that, we are going to dive into our perfect takes. And what I want to discuss, and it was something I had talked about in the coaching post I posted on Twitter this morning, but the top two teams right now, from a coaching standpoint, are the Baltimore Ravens and Dallas Cowboys. And they play the Baltimore Ravens will go to Jacksonville this week, and Dallas will go to Buffalo. I think both will. I haven't seen the lines, so this is a little risky for me to say it, but I think both of them will cover. I think they're going to have statement wins here against teams that are a little bit banged up and have flaws. And to me, I don't see those flaws with the Cowboys and Ravens. I see them as complete teams in the NFL. And you're trying to make a case for being a number one, number two seed in your respective conference. This is the way you do it.
I think that's a good point that you have there. I do like the coaching staff for both sides. I'm a big fan of Mike McDonald, like we talked about in the head coaching segment. I think Dan Quinn is really good. And then McCarthy is playing or calling excellent scripts, and Todd Monken's really shining as well. I believe your play caller ranking had Monken rising quite a bit this past week.
He was number
If
one this week, which I mean, the
Yeah, yeah.
offense has been clicking recently. Again, it's the biggest thing I bring up is that there's an issue with turnovers, and that can bite you in the butt in some of these closer games, especially as we go towards the playoffs.
Couldn't agree more. My perfect take is going to be one that's a bit more out there. We talked about the backup QBs today. You know, Jake Browning, Joe Flacco, Zach Wilson, all having good games. And then the last one we talked about Tommy DeVito. If you look, the Giants have won 3 in a row, and we talked about that ever since Dallas beat them. And I think they're going to win again in the dome in New Orleans. I think the Giants are going to continue their winning streak. And I think
Okay.
DeVito, I don't know if he's going to ball out per se, but he's going to do what he needs to do, have a mistake-free game, and get them the win.
I like that because Derek Carr is such a diva. Like
Yes.
I remember seeing a post this past week, and obviously it was right before the Mahomes meltdown. But it was something like Derek Carr, so much as somebody looks at him the wrong way in terms of the play that happened, and he's yelling at him. And it's like, dude, like throw a better ball, be on time, be more aggressive. And then Patrick Mahomes, he sees Kadarius Toney line up off sides or drop a pass, and he's clapping his hands, and it's next play. And obviously, he has his issue with the refs at the end with how the officiating was done. But it's one of those things that it's very interesting to compare a guy who's won a couple MVPs to a guy who's been kind of on the cusp of it. And it's some of those leadership qualities that I think he lacks. He has the ability to make some of the throws in this offense. He has the ability to get the ball to some of these playmakers, but they aren't on the same page as he is. And that's why there's a disconnect in New Orleans. And I think you're absolutely right. Tommy DeVito has the opportunity to go in and play upset down in New Orleans.
Yeah, you see all the clips of the receivers kind of just yelling at Derek Carr on the field and stuff like that. It was pretty similar to the stuff with Russ last year and the teammates there in Denver when they were but that was more the defensive
Yeah,
guys.
I was about to say those were
Yeah,
defensive players yelling at him, but his own center was yelling at him this past week.
yeah.
Like, dude, what
While
is
they were
going
winning,
on?
yeah, and you see, like, all the receivers just not really mess with him on social media and stuff. It's very interesting his kind of, persona as it's viewed by his teammates opposed to how the media views it, because the media kinda sees him as a guy that's, really emotional and passionate about the game and wants to win and stuff like that. There's, like, clips of him, like, shedding tears and pressers and stuff like that, but it seems like his teammates just don't really mess with him, and it's
I,
that dichotomy is interesting.
I'm sure it was different with the Raiders. He got drafted there. There was a love and affinity between the organization, the players, and him. I think when you go to a new spot and you're just assuming that that respect is given, not earned, I think that was the disconnect. Because I'm sure some of his teammates in Las Vegas, Oakland, depending on where they were at the time, would go to war for him. And
Mhm.
I don't see that in New Orleans. And I think it's a matter of the chemistry just not being right.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, we got to about the hour mark, just a little bit over, so that's impressive for us. Hopefully, we'll keep it about that range over the next few weeks as the season wraps up. If you guys have any questions, shoot them to us at Perfect Takes. Otherwise, we'll catch you next week.